Thank you.
Thank
you,
you.
Roberto, and thanks to everybody attending today. Let me also thank, from my part, Professor Marino for the presentation he prepared for this webinar and today's replay. As you mentioned, Eugenio Marchesi is the person in charge in Kyoto Club for International Relations, and he will substitute in the presentation Professor Marino, to whom, however, we are thankful for the cooperation. So my presentation is about the EU strategies, plans, targets, and legislation for preserving natural capital and biodiversity. And funding. I have included a section on the EU funding opportunities for Turkish civil society organizations and local authorities, because as we will see, the main funding schemes of the European Union specifically dedicated to the preservation of natural capital and biodiversity are open to EU NGOs and bodies only. But there are other EU funding opportunities for Turkish colleagues, also on natural capital and biodiversity, and that's why we thought it was useful to identify and to point to the main ones. Hopefully they will be useful for those of you active in Turkey. So where do we stand in the European Union with the preservation of natural capital and biodiversity? We have the latest picture published by the European Environment Agency, which, as the name says, is the main agency of the European Union following environmental issues. It is a EU structure based in Copenhagen, and they publish regular reports on different aspects of environmental safeguard and the state of the environment in the EU. Their latest publication on biodiversity is more or less 1 month old, October 19, and the summary is an alarm, if you want, because the agency says that unsustainable farming and forestry, urban sprawl and pollution are the top pressures to blame for a drastic decline. This is a quotation from the report. For a drastic decline in Europe's biodiversity, threatening the survival of thousands of animal species and habitats. Moreover, the agency tells us the European Union nature directives and other environmental laws still lack implementation by member states. And this is a problem because, you know, when legislation is passed at the European Union level, then it needs to be implemented. And in many countries, for example, I take the example my own, Italy, where we have a severe problem with controls. Implementation is very easily lacking on many, let's say, important and positive legislation. So there is a risk that legislation stays on water, on paper, as we say in Italian, and it's not implemented. And this is also the case for nature capital and biodiversity. The state of nature assessment is the most comprehensive health check of nature ever undertaken in the EU, has declared the commissioner, the current commissioner for the environment, oceans and fisheries. He's the one responsible within the European Commission of this part of the Commission's work. So, so to speak, you know, if even the Commissioner and the European Environment Agency tell us that there is a crisis, we better believe them, so to speak. That it's not an environmental organization, it's the top in the institutions responsible for natural capital in the European Union. Now, there are two main pieces of legislation in the European Union on this topic, and these are the so-called habitats and birds directives. Now, the habitats, as the names clarify, the habitats protect natural areas, territories, whereas the birds directive is dedicated to the protection of birds species. The status is that, as I quoted here from the European Environment Agency report, around half, 47% of the bird species in the EU have good status, which is less, however, 5% less than in the previous reporting period. And again, the proportion of birds with poor or bad status has increased by 7% in the last 6 years to reach a total of 39%. So 39% of the bird species in the EU have poor or bad status. Only 15% of the habitats of the European Union are considered in good conservation conditions, with 81%, so the large majority, having poor or bad conservation status. And also, in terms of habitats, compared with the previous reporting period, the share of habitats with bad conservation status has increased by 6%. We still have a problem of data, particularly with marine regions. So they're labeled as unknown, with unknown conservation status, which points to another problem in the general conservation strategies, the one of knowledge and access to reliable data. Let's say the half full glass is that around a quarter of species have a good conservation status at the EU level, which marks an increase of 4% compared to the previous reporting period. Now, here you may find all the details on the internet side, which you see at the bottom of this slide, with reference to Turkey, because as we will see later on, Turkey, within the pre-accession towards the European Union, is part of several bodies, among which also the European Environmental Agency. So you have a specific section of the European Environment Agency website dedicated to Turkey and in Turkish only. So for those of you following us from Turkey, you may find on this link very interesting materials and data information percentage, which may be useful for your work too. Now, the nature legislation, in addition to the two birds and habitats directives, are since 25 years marked by a very successful practice, which is called Natura 2000, which is a special conservation program stretching across all member states, and currently covering 18% of the European Union's land area and more than 6% of its sea territories. Natura 2000 has, let's say, is a success story in the conservation strategies of the European Union. Although the lights and shadows are mixed, one cannot say that no, it's only success, but it is landmark at the world level, not only with the European Union parameters. So in the Union, we have a strategy to connect all the areas which need to be, which are treasures and need to be protected, also using so-called green infrastructures to restore ecosystem services and allow non-human species to survive in their own habitats. An interesting exercise is what we call natural capital accounting, which provides an approach to quantify our natural capital and integrating it as much as possible into decision making. So when decisions are taken at the European as well as at the member states level, the natural capital accounting in theory should be a cross-cutting parameter to understand the natural impact of decisions and therefore steer decisions in the best possible directions to protect our natural capital. Now, the European Union gave itself a biodiversity strategy for 2020 up to this year, and from this year for the next 10 years the EU biodiversity strategy for 2030 is being discussed. You may know that the decision making at the European Union level is threefold. You have the European Commission, which is more or less you would say in quotation marks the government, so the executive body, Parliament, the European Parliament, which is the legislative one, and then the European Council, where the representatives of all member states sit. And in order to take decisions, there needs to be agreement between the three bodies, which is, if you think of the 27 member states, plus the Commission, plus Parliament, so it's quite a complicated democratic exercise, if you want. But at this stage, the Commission has adopted a new European Union biodiversity strategy for 2030, together with an associated action plan. So it's a comprehensive, ambitious, and long-term, so 10-year time perspective, plan to protect nature and attempt to reverse the degradation of ecosystems about which I spoke before. Now, the new ambition, which we welcome, of course, very much in Brussels at the European Union level, is that Europe's biodiversity is now being directly connected with the climate and the state of the planet as a whole. As you see, the so-called European Green Deal, of which the biodiversity strategy is one piece, will support the green recovery from the pandemics, the COVID-19 pandemics, but within a framework which foresees for the EU to become climate neutral, so no more greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, and the European Union would be the first world area to become climate neutral. while protecting animal, plants, and human life by cutting pollution, help business companies to become world leaders in clean products and technologies. That's the reference to Green Deal, and help ensure what is called a just and inclusive transition. So this is a new ambition. Of course, then reality is something else, but it goes in the direction which the international scientific community has been calling for, to drastically cut greenhouse gas emissions in order to keep global warming within the limits agreed by governments through the Paris Agreement in 2015, and avoid the catastrophic effects of climate change. On the other hand, it would help, say, on the positive side, win-win solutions of the green economy, circular economy, and bio economy. So the economy based not anymore on fossil fuels for energy and non-renewable raw materials, but on the contrary, an economy in peace with climate and with the planet. Of course, it's a very huge challenge, but we're all very turned on by it, because we saw already the positive results that choices of this kind may make to the improvement of our daily life. Now, the main elements of the biodiversity strategy for 2030 of the European Union are those, the four that you see on this slide. So, EU-wide network of protected areas on land and at sea, starting from the basis created already by the Natura 2000 program and areas, a EU nature restoration plan to improve the condition of now degraded ecosystems, a set of measures to enable the necessary transformative change, because of course change has a cost in economic terms, and you have to win people's hearts to carry it through. So improving knowledge, financing, and investing lots of money are needed for this. And then measures, because of course biodiversity and natural capitals know no borders, and the European Union is aware of that. So the challenge is global, and we need to take measures to tackle the global biodiversity challenge in the EU, in Turkey, but not only, also in other areas of the world. Now, in our view, this is a very positive approach, because if we saw it already on climate change, the European Union, after the Kyoto Protocol, was the first world area to launch targeted programs and initiatives, and it was then followed by other world regions, which also understood how important this was. So also for natural capital and biodiversity, we believe that if the European Union is serious and does what it has decided on paper, this will be an advantage for other world areas as well. Legislation is more or less, I don't need to go into details, what I mentioned already. So the Birds Directive, the Habitats Directive, and now the Biodiversity Strategy, the new one up to 2030, against the background, which also the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, which is a point of reference for this kind of topics, has outlined as very critical. with European wildlife species increasingly in danger, and 25% of the European animal species now threatened with extinction. Natura 2000, here you have the symbol, the logo, the very nice logo of this program. Is a positive success story, and all the information on all the European Union Natura 2000 protected areas are available online. This Natura 2000 viewer is the online tool that you can use to see what the situation is from Bulgaria, so near to the Turkish border, up to Lapland, and from Portugal down to the Russian border. Funding opportunities have gone hand in hand with the legislation process and with the approval of the biodiversity strategies. The main funding opportunity, which however is open to European Union organizations only, is called LIFE. The LIFE program is the most important funding instrument for the environment and climate action. Was created in 1992, and the current, maybe you know that the European Union plans 7 years by 7 years, both budget-wise and in terms of programs, then split into 1 year after the other within the 7-year framework. So the current, meaning from 2014 until 2020, the budget of LIFE program has been 3.4 billion euro, so an important sum. The budget for the next 7 years, so 2021, 2027, is being negotiated in these very months. I don't know if you heard that yesterday 2 member countries, Poland and Hungary, have put a veto on the budget proposals and conditions for the next 7 years, and this will take more time to find a compromise. Compromising is the key word in European Union decisions. Of course, when one country puts veto, this is a very strong tool with the risk of blocking the whole negotiation for the next 7 years. So it will have to be, and this time it's a principled issue. Principled matters and are the most difficult to deal with, because the Poland and Hungary do not want rule of law to be considered one of the conditionalities for to use EU funds. Because in the past months there have been criticism about national legislations in both countries on the judge, the judiciary powers and the freedom of press. So it's a very, very difficult issue, but sooner or later it will be solved. Anyway, to know how much LIFE program will have at its disposal in 2021, 2027, we still have to wait for some time. Now, a new part of the trend and of the ambition for natural capital and biodiversity is the decision by the European Investment Bank, which is, as it says in the logo, the EU bank. European Investment Bank has a governing body where all member countries are represented. And the EIB has launched the natural capital financing facility. So a minimum of 2 million euro, a maximum 15 million euro per project. Still currently in the pilot phase, but it's interesting because it gives you the idea of the new approach by finance and the finance world to sustainability and nature preservation. So this is a novum, and again, we hope the World Bank will follow along this track. Life and the natural capital financing are, as I was mentioning, for the time being open to EU member states only, but there are other EU funding opportunities available for our colleagues in Turkey to protect biodiversity and nature capital. Now, Turkey receives EU funding because it is a candidate country to join the European Union since 1999, and at the moment Turkey, or funding for Turkey is eligible and is possible through Erasmus for the education and training dimension, Horizon, the research, plus some economic programs, Customs 2020, Fiscalis, Cosme, and EASI. So, I mean, in theory, one can argue that everything has to do with the protection of natural capital, but the Erasmus and Horizon are the most direct funding opportunities you have also in Turkey from the European Union. Turkey, in addition to this funding, participates in the European Environmental Agency, in the European Monitoring Center for Drugs and Drug Addiction, Civil Protection Mechanism, and the European Solidarity Corps, which is a program dedicated to youth, where also environment and natural capital can be addressed. The numbers we are talking about are these that you see on this slide. The total funding, EU funding to Turkey for the 7 years 2014-2020 has been 3.5, bit over 3.5 billion euros. And the budget lines, which I indicated in red on the left screen of your, on the left side of your screen, are those directly connected with also with natural capital and biodiversity. So you see, it's rather a few hundred million of euros. So it's we are talking about important sums. How to know about the calls for proposals and the projects where you can submit to monitor deadlines and calls? You have several websites, which are the institutions, those of the institutions running programs open to Turkey. So the Civil Society, EU Civil Society Turkey, Civil Society Dialogue. So civiltoplumdialogu.org, plus Horizon Turkey and the National Agency of Horizon 2020 for the research. Now, the advice is also to use Eurodesk Turkey, which is an organization, non-profit organization, providing information on EU programs in Turkey. And Eurodesk Turkey has the so-called, what they call opportunity finder. You see the link at the bottom of this slide. And if you go there and subscribe to their newsletter, you automatically receive the updates of which calls are open for which topics and by when proposals need to be submitted. So very useful, I find. And of course, you have the representation of the European Commission, so the embassy, you would say, of the European Union to Turkey, plus EuropeAid, which is the external relations development agency, which funds also programs in Turkey. And right now there is a call until November 30th on climate change adaptation, and so also nature capital and biodiversity can go into that. And of course the Turkish authorities, Turkish government with the central finance contract unit, which is the one responsible for all program contracts. You can see on their website also then the details. Thank you very much for your attention. Some of you wrote using my email address after the previous webinar, the first when we had this webinar for the first time, and I'm taking this opportunity to renew my thanks to them. And I will try to answer all your questions either now or by email later on. Thanks again, and I leave the floor to Roberto and then my colleague Eugenio Marchesi for Professor Marino's presentation. Thank you.
I will read this presentation by Professor Marino from University of Molise about the natural capital and biodiversity. In particular, I will try to briefly outline why and how do we need to estimate or define the value of that natural capital. So this is this first slide just to introduce you the topic. This is a quite famous campaign initiative by WWF from more or less 10 years ago, if I remember well. Payments for environmental services. So as you already see what we are talking about today, giving economic value or trying to define with an economic approach the value of the natural capital. Why do we need to assess the value of the natural capital? Just because, as you can see, we had an urban demographic explosion. So the urban population since 2005, more or less, until today, has increased much more compared to the rural population, and if the trend continues to be the current one, it will probably double the rural population by 2050. So what need do they arise from the natural capital and ecosystem services? From the increased pressure, anthropogenic pressure, as I was saying before, on the environment. We are going to reach some points of no return. The most debated is the climate change one, but also the loss of biodiversity and the nitrogen cycle points of no return are very crucial for our future. So it's important not to reach them, of course. So we need to define the services offered by the natural capital. As a preliminary definition, we could use the Ehrlich's equation, which defines the impact as a product of the population, the affluence, and technology. These three factors are: the population is the size of the population, the affluence is defined as the standard of living, expressed in terms of per capita income. We will see later on some more details about this, and technology, which is defined as the impact it produces every dollar we spend. So here is an example of an estimate of the impact of the of some different way of lives, let's say, on our planet, on the natural capital. As you can see, there are some on the left. There are some different levels of consumptions. Sorry, some different levels of income: low income, medium income, high income, and then the USA, which is used as an example of the way of life they exported all over the world, more or less. So with a low income, the biocapacity use per capita, which is measured in global hectares, would be 1, and so the sustainable population at this level would be 13 billions of people. But if we look at the global average, so without going too high, just global average, which is around $9.5 thousand dollars, the sustainable population would be 5 billion, so already around the half of the total global population we are having now. So our way of life is already not sustainable for our planet. As a confirmation, the Earth Overshoot Day of 2020 fell on August 22. So what does it mean that Overshoot Day is quite obvious, but it means that it's the day when we begin to use more from nature than our planet can renew in the whole year. Before starting our technical presentation, I would just like to provide you a list of organizations and bodies dealing with the natural capital and the estimation, the evaluation of its value. So, for example, the Economics for Ecosystem and Biodiversity, TEEB. Here we can find a couple of interesting starting points. Like the first one is that we are still learning about the nature of value. So we are still expanding our concept of capital, which is not only economic, but has to include also the human, social, and natural capital. And the second one is that we still have difficulties in identifying the value of nature. Why is this important? As Sergio mentioned before, for example, there is the latest initiative by the European Investment Bank. So the need to identify a value of nature is important to understand how the financial benefits and how much should we spend for it. Let's say. Another platform, a large one, is the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, EPBES, which is an independent body counting now more than 100 members, 121 in 2015, but right now they will be probably more. And the last one I would like to show you is the Wealth Accounting and Evaluation of Ecosystem Services, which is more specific on the ecosystem services that we will go through later on. Of course, there is the global agenda for sustainable development goals with the 17 goals of the United Nations. This is famous all over the world, so I won't go deep through it. And as referring to what Sergio already told you in the previous presentation, as an example, the European Commission valued the benefits provided by the Natura 2000 network in between 200 and 300 billion euro per year. So this is quite a large amount of money. So let's go to the technical side. I will try to go through it briefly. You will have a follow-up on our website with the more detailed presentation. So just going quick through the slides. The term natural capital was proposed the first time by David Pearce as a way to underline the role of nature in supporting the economy and human well-being. So, as in other words by Robert Costanza, if we can be the extension of the economic notion of capital to environmental goods and services. We could define the natural capital as made up of living and non-living components of ecosystems, generating goods and services for humanity. So as you saw by these three first definitions, natural capital is always defined in relation to the human well-being or the services for humanity. Why is natural capital also a company capital? Because, of course, the state of health, vitality, and resilience of natural systems is really important also in referring to the climate change and the adaptation to the climate change extreme events. The health, vitality, and resilience is guarantee and prerequisite for the health, well-being, and development of human societies, because companies have as the very basis of their existence the use of natural capital, and because natural capital, of course, is a key pillar of the green economy and circular economy. What are the natural capital assets? Which are the natural capital assets and types of benefits? Here are some examples. The assets could be biodiversities, and so species, ecological communities, soils, fresh water, land, of course the atmosphere, the oceans. The benefit would be food, the fiber, but also social capital, right, recreation or clean air, of course, wildlife, equable climate, which is quite important in these very last years, and fresh water, of course. So this is a stylized interpretation of what could happen in the coming years if in some different frameworks, let's say. If we continue to do as we are doing right now, so in other words, if we stick to our business as usual, we will probably have a great loss of natural capital. So 2015 is the starting point, let's say, the reference point. 2015 is the year when the Paris Agreement has been signed by the first parties, at least. So business as usual would lead to a very great loss of natural capital. By implementing strong protection measures, I mean those that are already available but not completely implemented, we will reduce our loss, but not completely. I mean nearly the half or something like the half, but not completely. So we would not have a net loss. What we will need to do is to improve our current policies for protecting and preserving our natural capital in order to increase the natural capital and to arrive to the objective until 2040. What could be a strategy for improving natural capital? Starting by the monitoring and measuring natural capital by, for example, the foundation. It's leading to the valuation of natural capital, and then trying to build up a prioritization framework, so targets and risk registers. Then we could start with specific investment action, for example, new natural capital infrastructure programs, priority investments, of course, initiatives like those mentioned already by the European Investment Bank. And then financing initiatives. So where could we find the resources? For example, maintenance expenditures, wealth fund, compensation for damage to natural capital. An example of how the value of natural capital could be could be on a graphic, let's say. So where we talk about critical risks, values of natural capital are infinite. So on the left side of this graphic. Then with this hyperbole, where the value is at risk but not critical, a small quantity changes in the natural capital could bring to big changes in value, like the economic offer and demand and offer curve graphics. When we have safe, so there is not high risk, we have no changes in value since there is no follow uses. So this is the opposite of the critical risk. What could be the options for investing in natural capital? For example, woodland planting. Of course, we define strong evidence, trying to define the benefits, economic benefits, of course. So woodland planting has strong evidence on economic benefits. Of course, for increased woodland cover, for its great recreation value, especially close to towns and cities, upland pay, peatland restoration, wetland creation, protecting and expanding areas of intertidal habitats, which has strong benefits also for the climate change adaptation, improving efficiencies and management. So when we talk about, as before, we said that we are still trying to understand how to define the natural capital. So we know that the economic point of view is not anymore the only one to take into account when trying to define the capital, the value of an initiative, of anything we are approaching. We have to take into account, of course, the human capital, the social capital, and the natural capital includes all of the before mentioned dimensions. The natural capital is measured, is, let's say, it provides ecosystem services through the interaction of the ecosystem service with the other dimensions of the evaluation, we have the sustainable human well-being, according, of course, to the definitions by the researchers and the publication studies. In general, this is the direction where the studies are where the studies are addressing, let's say. So try to understand how the different dimensions can interact. For example, we have the economic capital, so traditional knowledge, public and private institutions, they provide goods and services to the society, creating cultural capital. The cultural capital leads to environmental policies and traditional practices that can contribute to the natural capital. The natural capital, on the other hand, provides ecosystem services, raw materials, and contributes to the economic capital. As we mentioned before, the natural capital provides ecosystem services, or at least the services, the contribution by the natural capital could be or can be defined with the ecosystem services. What are the ecosystem services? They are the benefits people obtain from the ecosystem. So it could be provisioning services such as food and water, regulating services such as disease and flood control, cultural services such as spiritual and recreational benefits, and of course supporting services such as nutrient cycling, maintaining the conditions for life on Earth. Here are some examples of these different categories we mentioned. Provisioning services could be clean water, fish, food, pollination. Regulating could be purifying waters, carbon storage, clean air. Cultural services are aesthetic values, recreation, point of view, education, habitat, and of course supporting services, food, soil formation, biodiversity. Okay, so going more in detail, the ecosystem services are the ecological characteristics, function, or processes directly or indirectly contributing to the human well-being. As we said before, this is a definition by Robert Costanza we already mentioned in the previous slide. What is important is to distinguish between ecosystem processes and functions on one hand and ecosystem services on the other. So the services are those processing are those processes and functions, sorry, that benefit people. So they only exist if they contribute to human well-being and cannot be defined independently, as could be the ecosystem processes. Of course, there are some different point of views about this. Some argued that the concept of ecosystem services represents a very anthropocentric, instrumental, utilitarian view of nature, trying to estimate the value only referred to the human well-being, so the natural existing only to serve the humans. But of course, the notion of ecosystem services implies the recognition that humans depend for their well-being and their very survival on the rest of nature. So we could say that ecosystem services are defined not to put nature on human services, but on the other hand, to highlight how humans are depending for their well-being from on the nature. Okay, we can go forward. Okay, this is a simplified model, of course, to outline the relationship between environmental function and human benefits. Of course, the biosphere provides ecosystem services, which could be resources, waste absorptions, or other services, giving benefits to the giving human benefits to the economy, health, and welfare. And as a cycle, these human benefits could lead to an increase of the natural capital in the biosphere. Here are some definitions of the ecosystem services. I won't go through all of them. You will have the presentation on our website. So these are a few, maybe just to mention the latest ones. As you can see, the human well-being appears from 2007 onwards. So the last one is the contributions of ecosystem structure and function in combination with other inputs to human well-being. Of course, as we mentioned before, ecosystem services exist only in relation to human values, since they are not ecosystem processes which can be defined independently, but services, and so they exist if there is something they can serve, otherwise they cannot exist. So services are the production of benefits which are of value to people. So we already mentioned the different categories: provisioning, regulating, cultural, and supporting services. This classification is defined by the Common International Classification of Ecosystem Services, CICES, which has been developed from the work on environmental accounting undertaken by the European Environment Agency, the EEA, already mentioned by Sergio Andreis in the other presentation, the first part of the webinar. Some examples: procurement services through food from agriculture or marine ecosystems, virgin materials and energy, of course, wood, biofuels, mineral resources, running water, medicinal resources. Regulation and maintenance services could be local climate and air quality, carbon storage, CO2 sequestration, moderation of extreme events. Of course, it is very important for climate change, biological control, prevention of hydrogeological instability, etc. Cultural services could be recreational, aesthetic and relational, tourism, spiritual experience also, aesthetic sense, let's say. And the last thing I would like to highlight in this presentation is the land use change. I mean, of course, land use change as the major direct driver of the loss of both biodiversity and ecosystem services in Europe and Central Asia. So I won't read the whole article, just to mention it so you can, because the land use change is of course one of the major threats to biodiversity in the latest 15-20 years. Let's say you can find a bunch of publication on the web, so it's very trending topic, let's say, in the scientific publication in the last years. So I won't go through this. I finish here my presentation and end it here. So thank you very much. Here is the email of Professor Davide Marino. If you have any technical questions, please write to him. Of course, you can write the questions in the dedicated window that you have on your right if you have any question for me right now. Otherwise, thanks a lot to everybody who participated to this cycle of webinars we held for the SCSDSD project. Thanks a lot to our colleagues from the Environmental Energy Association from Izmir, Çevreci Enerji Derneği, which we thank a lot for the contribution to this initiative. And we remind to the participants that on 19 and 20 of November, we will have in Izmir, there will be the final event of the project. We will participate online, me and Sergio. So for those who will be there, we will see you there in a couple of days. And for the others, thank you very much for staying with us. I end it here. So thanks a lot to Roberto too for supporting us.
Thank you very much, Eugenio.
See you next time for those who will be there on the 19th, and thanks a lot to all the others.
Thank you very much.